All right, hello everybody. This is Joseph Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, November 13th, 2014. The year is flying by. I have to apologize for missing the news and views last week. I was on the road and I might try and make up another news and views just kind of as a makeup thing this week, but lots of news. And I want to focus today on one particular story that really kind of fell off the radar screen. It was shared with me by one of the website members and subscribers, and it's such an important story. I had to share it. I'm going to do my usual thing here. I'm going to crawl way out onto the twig of high octane speculation. But this is a really important story, and I hope you'll pay attention to it. This was out of the Chinese news agency Xinhua, and the story is by a Chinese journalist by the name of Deng Yushan. All right. And it appeared about a week ago tomorrow, on November the 7th. And the title of the story says it all. It's called Commentary and Encouraging Breakthrough. Note that term, breakthrough, in China-Japan rapprochement. All right. And let me read to you some paragraphs from this important article, and then I want to comment on what I think may be going on a bit, possibly behind the scenes, in Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's Japan. The dateline is Beijing, November 7th. The Chinese news agency Xinhua, quote, the icy relations between China and Japan exhibited unmistakable, albeit nascent, signs of thawing on Friday, with the announcement of a broad bilateral consensus on achieving a rapprochement. In a visibly productive meeting, Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi and Japanese National Security Secretary Chief Shotaro Yachi, a key foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, agreed that the two sides should continue to develop their strategic relationship of mutual benefit. On the political front, they pledged to seek consensus on overcoming the difficulties under the spirit of facing history squarely and working together for the future. On the territorial row over the Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea, they recognized that China and Japan hold different positions and agreed to establish a crisis management and control mechanism. In other words, folks, a hotline between the Kremlin and the White House, only in this case, a hotline between Tokyo and Beijing, to establish a crisis management and control mechanism so as to preclude further escalations and disastrous eventualities. They also agreed to gradually resume political, diplomatic, and security dialogue via various bilateral channels and make concerted efforts to cement mutual political trust. Given all the stakes that are involved, the breakthrough is of particular significance. There's that word again. This is being described by the official Chinese government news agency Xinhua as a breakthrough, is of particular significance. It has brought the relationship between the world's second and third largest economies back to temperatures above the freezing point. Should it be properly implemented, it will mark a turning point in the trajectory of China-Japan relations. Now, I want to comment on this development because I think this is truly significant. And the reason why is we have to put it into a little bit of context, not only in terms of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's government in Tokyo, but going back to the government that took power prior to the Fukushima disaster. You'll recall that that government did some very interesting things. It was clear that it intended to mend the fences with China that had been simmering since the Japanese invasion of that country during World War II. And One of the things that that government did, you'll recall, is they were strongly requesting that the United States shut down its base on Okinawa. And you'll recall that the response of the then Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, was to issue nothing less than an outright threat to the Japanese government that if they persisted in that course of action, there would be dire consequences. And then, of course, a few weeks later, we had the Fukushima disaster. You'll also recall that that government was a government that was not of the Japanese Liberal Democratic Party. In other words, it was a government that was not part of the long 50 years reign of the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. And that government was also talking with China about the possibility of a state visit of Emperor Akihito to Beijing, which would have been precedent making for the Japanese emperor to visit China. That was a clear attempt to mend the fences. Then we got the government of Shinzo Abe, all right, who represented a return to the ostensibly pro-American stance of the Liberal Democratic Party, which has basically been the ruling party of Japan for the most part in all of the years following World War II, with the exception of those brief hiccups. Now, Abe, you'll recall, has also done something else. He has been pushing for the removal of the Japanese constitutional restriction to spend only 1% of the Japanese gross domestic product on national defense. Abe has been wanting to remove that or to raise it and significantly expand and basically rearm Japan. And the speculation in the geopolitical literature has been that Abe has been doing this as part of a response to American pressure for Japanese rearmament as part of the American pivot to the Pacific policy. All right. And I do think at one level, that's exactly what Abe and his rearmament scheme is all about. I do think it is in part in response to that American pressure. But now we have this story which indicates that the Abe government is really trying to continue the course of action of the previous Japanese government, that government that was very clearly embarked upon a process of diplomatic bilateral rapprochement with mainland China. And Abe's government is now pursuing that. So what do we have? And I'm going to be way out on the limb of speculation here and what I think is possibly going on with this Japanese rearmament and with these bilateral arrangements that they're trying to put into place with mainland China. Because as that article from Xinhua makes very clear, the idea of having Asian security and stability with the two largest economies in Asia, China and Japan, at loggerheads with each other is simply silly. It can't be done. So Japan is now emerging once again as a key arbiter in East Asian political and financial affairs. All right. And if Japan is going to continue to play that role, it has to have a strong military. All right. Now, here's what I suspect is a hidden possibility in the thinking, perhaps, and the secret and quiet discussions that Abe's ministers in his government might actually be thinking. They have given no public indication of this, but I think this is what is really going on. With American unipolarism and the increasing discontent of America's major power allies in Europe, think particularly of the careful diplomatic tightrope that Chancellor Angela Merkel has been walking in the past few years, and particularly in the past few months with the Ukrainian crisis. Let's recall that recently the German defense minister came out and told NATO that the German military was in such a state of disrepair that it had very few operational fighters in the Luftwaffe. The German Navy had only 3 operational submarines, and that the German army would not be ready to respond to any NATO emergency, say in the case, and she offered this example, of a war in the Baltic states. So in other words, that was Germany, believe it or not, telling us that they were militarily unprepared to meet any of their NATO obligations in the case of an emergency. That's Germany signaling the pullback from NATO. Now, if you believe for a moment that the German military is that unprepared, think again. It's really kind of a joke. What Abe, I think, is doing is that he can cover Japanese unease with American unipolarism, and particularly this pivot to the Pacific and a new confrontational stance, not only vis-a-vis the BRICS bloc, but vis-a-vis Russia and China particularly, that Abe can cover Japanese discontent and rearm in response to American pressure. But that rearmament may have as an ultimate goal the ability to remove Japan and pursue a much more independent course of action vis-a-vis China and vis-a-vis the other economic powers in the region, India, Indonesia, and so on. So in other words, I think this is a long-term game that we're seeing now unfold between China and Japan. And eventually, just as I've suspected Germany, or France for that matter, may do in NATO, France is not a member of NATO, as we all know. Germany pulling out of NATO, or Germany pulling back from its commitments to NATO, is a huge, huge crack in the tapestry of alliances that the United States built after World War II. This is a signal, in my opinion, that the same thing is now happening. The same thing is now occurring in the Pacific. And this is a story we're going to have to watch very, very carefully. We're going to have to track what specific types of agreements that China and Japan may now embark upon. Because a resurgent Japanese military is as much a problem with China and a problem with the United States as it is with Japan. I've got a phone call, folks. I've got to go. I'll see you on the flip.